12 years. That's how long I'd been married to Lila, the woman I thought was my partner in every sense of the word. Our life looked perfect from the outside. A nice house in the suburbs, yearly vacations, and countless snapshots of laughter and love. Yet, in hindsight, there were cracks I ignored, subtle signs I brushed off as paranoia. It all started with the late nights. "Henry keeps piling on work," she'd say, feigning exhaustion while slipping her phone into her pocket. Henry Caldwell, her boss, had been nothing but a name to me, a demanding CEO, known for his charm and ruthlessness. I didn't think much of it until the nights turned into weekends, the vague excuses piling up alongside my growing unease. I noticed the changes slowly. Lila, who once shared every mundane detail of her day, grew distant, her answers curt and evasive. Her phone, once left on the kitchen counter, was now glued to her hand. One evening, as she showered, a message popped up on her screen. "Can't stop thinking about you." My stomach twisted. The name read HC, and I didn't need a detective to put the pieces together. Instead of confronting her outright, I decided to gather proof. Maybe it was denial, or maybe I didn't want to believe my wife was capable of such betrayal. I started keeping tabs, checking her phone when she wasn't around, noting her new obsession with her appearance, her glowing demeanor when she thought I wasn't watching. And then, there was the hotel receipt. I found it stuffed carelessly in the back pocket of her jeans as I folded laundry one weekend. It wasn't just any hotel, it was a luxury spot downtown, the kind of place you'd go for a romantic escape. My hands shook as I held the evidence, my mind racing. Was it a one-time thing? Or had this been going on for months? I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more. Something undeniable, something she couldn't twist or explain away. Over the next few weeks, I delved deeper. Her emails, her social media, even tracking her car through the GPS app we shared for emergencies. Every breadcrumb led me closer to the truth, and with each discovery, my heartbreak transformed into a simmering rage. Lila wasn't just cheating, she was risking our lives. One particularly damning text revealed that Henry had knowingly given her a serious illness, downplaying it as manageable and blaming her for overreacting. My anger boiled over. This wasn't just infidelity. This was reckless, selfish, and utterly unforgivable. But I wasn't going to lose my cool. Not yet. If Henry thought he could get away with this, he didn't know who he was dealing with. The day I decided to follow Lila was the day everything changed. Her usual excuse, a late meeting with Henry, set off alarm bells. She'd used that line too many times. I told her I'd be working late myself, kissed her on the cheek as she left, and then waited. 10 minutes later, I got in my car and followed her, staying far enough behind to avoid suspicion. She didn't head to her office. Instead, she drove downtown, weaving through traffic until she pulled into the parking garage of the Lancaster, the same hotel where I found the receipt. My heart sank, but I stayed focused. I parked a few levels below, threw on a baseball cap, and followed her inside. The lobby was a symphony of polished marble and muted conversations. Lila moved with purpose, her green dress clinging to her as she headed for the elevators. I hesitated, unsure of my next move. Should I confront her now? Catch her in the act? But something stopped me. I wanted more, proof that would shatter any defense she could conjure up. I waited until the elevator doors closed, then approached the front desk, acting as casual as I could. "Excuse me," I said to the young man behind the counter. "My wife just went upstairs, but I forgot the room number. Can you help me out?" "Lila Grayson." The clerk hesitated, his professionalism battling with protocol. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't share that information." I forced a smile, slipping him a folded $20. "Just between us?" He glanced around, then leaned in. "Room 702. I thanked him and walked away, heart pounding. On my way to the 7th floor, I thought about what I might find behind that door. Lila, laughing in Henry's arms? Or worse? My thoughts were interrupted by the ding of the elevator. The hallway stretched in front of me, thick carpet muffling my steps as I approached the room. I could hear voices. Her laugh, soft, familiar, but laced with something I hadn't heard in years. A man's deeper tone followed. My fists clenched as I pressed my ear to the door, catching fragments of their conversation. It was enough. I pulled out my phone and recorded a few seconds of their muffled exchange before stepping back. Storming in wouldn't do me any good, not without a plan. I left the hotel seething but determined. Lila had betrayed me in ways I never imagined, but I wasn't going to let her or Henry destroy me. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own life. I combed through her emails, accessed her cloud storage, and even went through the trash. What I found was more than incriminating, it was devastating. Photos of them together, hotel reservations, and text messages that made my stomach turn. Henry called her his perfect distraction, while she gushed about feeling alive with him. I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. Instead, I started building my case. Every screenshot, every receipt, every damning piece of evidence was cataloged and stored. I contacted a lawyer, laying out the foundation for what was to come. But I wasn't just planning a divorce. I was planning justice. Henry Caldwell needed to learn that actions have consequences, and Lila, well, she would face the fallout of her choices soon enough. I just needed the perfect stage to deliver my masterpiece. And I found it, the company's annual gala, where Henry would be surrounded by his peers, his reputation laid bare for me to dismantle. If Lila wanted drama, I'd give her a performance she'd never forget. The annual gala was weeks away, but for me, it was the finish line. Every step I took, every detail I planned, was aimed at that night. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. Lila and Henry thought they were untouchable, but I'd been silently gathering everything I needed to expose them. During those weeks, I played the part of the clueless husband. I didn't change my routine or confront her, though it killed me to see her move around the house like nothing was wrong. Every smile she gave me felt like a slap, but I kept my emotions locked down. "Everything okay?" she asked one evening as we ate dinner. Her voice was warm, almost concerned, like she still cared. "Yeah, just tired from work," I replied, forcing a smile. Inside, I felt like I was breaking apart. She smiled back, that fake, practiced grin. "Well, don't overwork yourself. We've got that charity gala in a couple of weeks. You're still coming, right?" "Oh, I wouldn't miss it," I said. The irony was almost too much. I spent every spare moment preparing. I worked with my lawyer to organize the evidence, hotel receipts, text logs, and photos, into an airtight case. I even hired a private investigator to confirm a few lingering suspicions. What he uncovered went beyond what I'd expected. Henry wasn't just a cheater. He was reckless. Company funds were being used to bankroll his affair with my wife. Dinners, hotels, even jewelry. People like him always slip up eventually, the PI told me, sliding over a thick file. "You've got more than enough to blow his life up." I thanked him and drove home, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Henry wasn't just endangering my marriage. He was stealing from the people who trusted him. I wasn't just justified, I was obligated to take him down. The night before the gala, I printed everything. The photos, the emails, the receipts. I packed them neatly into a folder and made duplicates, just in case. I also prepared a slideshow with the most damning evidence, loaded onto a USB drive. If everything went as planned, this would be the most talked about night in their company's history. The morning of the gala, Lila was practically glowing. She spent hours getting ready, stepping out of the bathroom in an emerald dress that clung to her perfectly. She looked stunning, but all I saw was the lies. "How do I look?" she asked, twirling in front of me. I gave her a once-over and nodded. "Beautiful." My voice was flat, but she didn't seem to notice. The drive to the venue was quiet. Lila scrolled through her phone, probably texting Henry, while I kept my eyes on the road, rehearsing my lines. This was my moment to flip the script, and I wasn't going to waste it. When we arrived, the gala was already in full swing. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and sequin dresses, the air buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses. Lila was in her element, charming everyone she spoke to. I watched her from across the room, steeling myself for what was to come. And then I saw him. Henry Caldwell, all smug confidence in his tailored suit, holding court among a group of colleagues. He didn't even glance in my direction, completely unaware of the storm heading his way. I didn't need a drink to calm my nerves. My determination was fuel enough. As the evening wore on, I quietly circulated among the guests, planting whispers about a scandal involving Henry. Faces grew curious, then concerned, as the rumors spread. By the time Henry stepped onto the stage to deliver his toast, the room was a powder keg of anticipation. I moved to the center of the crowd, the USB drive in my pocket and the folder under my arm. My heart raced as Henry raised his glass, a self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. To success, he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. To growth, to... I interrupted with a slow, deliberate clap. Heads turned toward me, the room falling silent. Henry froze, his glass halfway to his lips. Before we toast, Henry, I said, stepping forward, why don't we talk about the real sacrifices made for your success? The room went dead quiet, the kind of silence that makes every sound feel amplified. My slow clap echoed through the ballroom as I stepped toward the stage, folder in hand. Henry's grin faltered, his eyes narrowing as he tried to mask his unease. Elliot, what's the meaning of this? He asked, his voice tight. I smiled, a calm, calculated smile. Just thought this would be the perfect time to recognize all the effort behind your so-called success, Henry. Lila's face was pale as she edged toward the back of the room, her green dress catching the light. She must have known. Henry's expression shifted from irritation to something closer to panic. I climbed the few steps to the stage and stood beside him, facing the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, scanning the audience. We're here tonight to celebrate the achievements of Henry Caldwell, a man who's built an empire, led this company to new heights, and, unfortunately, betrayed the very people who trusted him. The murmur in the crowd grew louder. I placed the folder on the podium, opened it, and pulled out the first document, a hotel receipt with Henry's name on it. This, I said, holding it up, is just one of many expenses Henry has charged to the company. But these weren't business trips. They were personal getaways. With my wife. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, and a few people whispered furiously to one another. I glanced at Lila. She stood frozen, her hand clutching her clutch like a lifeline. I wasn't done. I pulled out more evidence. Copies of texts, photos, and detailed logs of their meetings. With a flick of my hand, I signaled the AV technician I'd bribed earlier. The enormous screens behind the stage lit up, displaying damning text messages and photos of Lila and Henry together. The crowd erupted in stunned disbelief. Here's the kicker, I said, my voice cold and steady. Not only has Henry betrayed his own family, but he's also recklessly endangered mine. He knowingly infected my wife with an illness, one he's had for years but kept hidden. Henry's face turned ashen, his polished veneer cracking in real time. Lila stumbled forward, tears streaming down her face as she mouthed something I didn't care to hear. My focus was on the crowd, on the shifting tide of judgment as they turned against him. This man, I continued, my voice rising, is not just an unfaithful husband or a terrible boss. He's a fraud. He's used company funds, your hard-earned money, to finance his double life. I gestured to the folder. Inside here are detailed records of every misuse, every transaction. I trust the board will take swift action. The room was chaos. Board members began huddling, their hushed conversations growing heated. Henry's wife, Eleanor, a regal woman known for her sharp tongue, rose from her seat, her heels clicking ominously against the marble floor as she approached the stage. Henry, she said icily, her voice cutting through the noise, you've humiliated me for the last time. Then, with a sharp crack, she slapped him across the face, the sound drawing cheers and gasps from the crowd. Henry's facade crumbled. Security approached, and one of the board members grabbed the folder, flipping through its contents with a grim expression. Mr. Caldwell, he said loudly, we'll be conducting an emergency meeting. Effective immediately, you're suspended pending investigation. Henry tried to protest, but his words were drowned out by the chaos around him. He looked at me, his expression a mix of rage and desperation. You'll regret this, he hissed, low enough for only me to hear. I leaned in, my voice calm and resolute. Not as much as you will. As security escorted him from the venue, I turned my attention to Lila, who stood trembling at the edge of the crowd. She stepped toward me, tears streaking her makeup. Elliot, please, she begged, her voice cracking. Let me explain. I raised a hand, stopping her mid-step. You destroyed everything we built, Lila, I said, my tone colder than I thought possible. For what? For him. You made your choice. Now live with it. She collapsed into a chair, sobbing, but I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. As the crowd continued buzzing, I slipped out of the ballroom, leaving the aftermath behind. My work was done, and my revenge was served. Public, precise, and unforgettable. The drive home that night was surreal. I replayed the events in my mind, the gasps, the looks of shock, Henry's mask of arrogance finally cracking. For weeks, I had dreamed of this moment, but now that it had happened, I felt nothing. Not joy, not triumph, just a strange emptiness. I wasn't sure what to expect when I got home. Would Lila even come back? Would she dare? I poured myself a drink and sat in the darkened living room, waiting. It was close to midnight when the sound of a key turning in the lock broke the silence. The door creaked open, and there she was, makeup smeared, her emerald dress now a wrinkled mess. Her eyes were puffy, and she looked like a shadow of the confident woman who had walked into that gala hours earlier. "Elliot," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I didn't respond. I just watched her as she hesitated in the doorway, clutching her purse like it could shield her from the weight of what she'd done. I didn't know where else to go," she finally said, stepping inside. "I need to explain." I took a long sip of my drink, the ice clinking softly against the glass. "There's nothing to explain, Lila. I saw enough." She moved closer, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I never stopped loving you." I laughed bitterly, the sound surprising even me. "Mistake? That's what you're calling it? Months of sneaking around, lying, betraying me? That's not a mistake, Lila. That's a choice, a series of them." She flinched as though I'd struck her. "You don't understand," she said, tears streaming down her face. I felt invisible. Elliot. You were so focused on work, on everything else. And Henry, he made me feel seen." My jaw tightened. "So your solution was to sleep with him? To risk everything we built, our marriage, our lives?" "I didn't think it would go this far," she cried. "I didn't think." "No," I interrupted sharply. "You didn't think. Not about me, not about us, not about the consequences. All you cared about was how he made you feel." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by her quiet sobs. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I can fix this," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "We can fix this. Please, Elliot, tell me what I have to do." I stood, setting my glass down with deliberate care. "You can start by packing your things," I said coldly. "I don't want you here anymore." Her eyes widened, panic flooding her face. "No. Please, don't do this. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't throw this away." I shook my head. "You threw it away the moment you walked into that hotel room, Lila. And the moment you kept walking back." Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, clutching at the hem of my shirt like a drowning woman reaching for a lifeline. "Please," she begged, her voice raw. "I'll leave him. I swear. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't give up on us." I stepped back, her grip slipping away. "It's too late for that," I said quietly. "You gave up on us long before tonight." With that, I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her crumpled on the living room floor. I didn't have the energy to argue or console her. All I wanted was to close the door on this chapter of my life and start over. The next morning, Lila was gone. Whether she left on her own or because she knew I would force her out, I didn't care. The house felt lighter without her, though the silence was deafening. I knew this was just the beginning. The fallout from the gala was bound to ripple through our lives for weeks, months, maybe even years. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The news of the gala spread quickly. By the next morning, whispers about what had unfolded reached every corner of Henry Caldwell's world. Videos of the confrontation began circulating online. Although the company tried to keep things under wraps, it wasn't long before official statements were released, confirming an internal investigation into Henry's actions. I stayed out of the spotlight, working quietly from home. My phone buzzed with updates from a contact inside the company. The board is moving fast. He's been suspended indefinitely. Investigations in full swing. Henry's downfall was swift. By the end of the week, he was out of the company, forced to resign under a cloud of scandal. Eleanor, his wife, made sure he wouldn't land softly. She went public, using her connections to highlight his years of infidelity, financial misconduct, and manipulative behavior. The media loved it, and Henry became a case study in corporate disgrace. Former employees began speaking up, sharing their stories of harassment and abuse. The narrative shifted from a private scandal to a public reckoning. By the time the dust settled, Henry Caldwell was unemployable and ostracized. Lila didn't escape unscathed. The affair, now public knowledge, became a source of humiliation for her. Our mutual friends distanced themselves, and whispers followed her wherever she went. She moved into a small apartment across town, her perfect suburban life reduced to a shadow of its former self. She called me several times, her tone shifting between desperation and guilt. "I made a mistake, Elliot. I know that now. I need you. Please, can we at least talk?" I listened but never gave her what she wanted. I couldn't. Too much had been broken. When she showed up at the house unannounced one day, I barely recognized her. "I'm still your wife," she said, standing on the porch like nothing had happened. I didn't even open the screen door. "Not anymore, Lila. That ended the day you chose him over me." I walked away, leaving her there. Divorce papers followed soon after. I kept things simple. No drawn-out fights, no theatrics. Lila didn't argue. She knew she wasn't in a position to make demands. I poured myself into my photography, a passion I'd neglected for too long. What started as a distraction turned into something more, a way to rebuild my life. I traveled, capturing landscapes and raw moments, each shutter click a step toward reclaiming my identity. One evening, I received a message from Eleanor. "You're braver than most, Elliot. What you did took courage. If you ever want to talk, let me know." I didn't reply immediately, but her words stayed with me. They reminded me that while betrayal had taken so much, it hadn't taken everything. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, hope. I had lost the life I thought I wanted, but I still had the chance to build something new. One step at a time, I intended to do just that. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into a new life, one I hadn't chosen but was determined to shape. The house was quieter, almost eerie at first. Without Lila's presence, it felt less like a home and more like a blank slate. Every room held memories, but instead of avoiding them, I began the process of reclaiming my space. I started small. Her clothes, her photos, and the little trinkets she'd scattered around the house. I packed them all into boxes and left them by the door. When she came to collect them, I didn't say much, and neither did she. The exchange was brief and emotionless, but when the door closed behind her, it felt like another weight had lifted. I threw myself into my photography, booking small gigs and expanding my portfolio. Nature became my sanctuary. I spent hours in the woods, on mountain trails, or by the ocean, capturing moments that felt untouched by the chaos of my personal life. The solitude was healing. Each photo I took felt like a piece of myself being stitched back together. Meanwhile, the fallout for Henry continued to snowball. Every week brought new headlines, former employees coming forward with allegations, stories about misused funds, and the details of his crumbling marriage. Eleanor wasn't pulling punches, and part of me respected her for it. She wasn't content with just leaving him. She wanted to make sure he paid for everything he'd done. Lila called occasionally, though less and less as time went on. The desperation in her voice gave way to resignation. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said during one of our last conversations. "For everything. I know I can't undo it, but I hope someday you can forgive me." I didn't respond right away. Forgiveness wasn't something I could offer. Not yet, maybe not ever. "Take care of yourself, Lila," I said finally, and hung up. Despite everything, life slowly began to feel manageable again. My photography business grew, and with it, my confidence. I started traveling for work, meeting new people, and rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten. One day, I received a message from Eleanor. "I'm hosting a small gathering for people who've been through their own version of Henry's destruction. It's informal, but I think you'd find it worthwhile. Let me know if you're interested. At first, I hesitated. The idea of stepping into any social situation felt daunting, but something about Eleanor's words struck a chord. Maybe it was the acknowledgement that I wasn't alone in this, that others had faced similar betrayals and come out the other side. I decided to go. The evening was surprisingly casual. Eleanor greeted me warmly, her sharp wit and no-nonsense demeanor as impressive in person as it had been from afar. The gathering was small, intimate, with a mix of people from different walks of life. Some had been employees of Henry's, others spouses or partners who had been collateral damage in his selfish pursuits. For the first time in months, I found myself sharing my story. Not as a victim, but as someone who had taken control, who had stood up for himself. The conversations were cathartic, each one reinforcing the idea that I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. Eleanor pulled me aside as the night wound down. "You've got a resilience about you, Elliot," she said. "It's rare. Don't let anyone take that from you." As I drove home, her words lingered. Resilience. It wasn't something I'd thought about much, but she was right. I'd been through hell, but I was still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. Not just surviving, but truly living. Months passed, and the chaos slowly gave way to clarity. Life wasn't back to normal, it probably never would be, but it was mine again. The house felt different now, no longer haunted by Lila's presence. I repainted the walls, rearranged furniture, and even started a small garden in the backyard. It wasn't just about redecorating, it was about reclaiming my space and making it my own. Photography continued to be my anchor. It wasn't just a career anymore. It was therapy. Capturing raw, unfiltered moments through the lens reminded me of the beauty in imperfection. I traveled more, often to places I'd never considered visiting before. Every trip felt like a step further from the wreckage of my old life. Meanwhile, Henry Caldwell had all but disappeared from public life. The investigation into his financial misdeeds dragged on, but it was clear his career was over. Occasionally, I'd hear updates, rumors of him selling off assets to cover legal fees or being blacklisted from certain industries. Lila's life wasn't any easier. From what little I heard through mutual acquaintances, she was struggling. Her reputation had taken a hit, and the glamorous lifestyle she once loved was gone. She'd lost her job, her social circle, and most painfully, the trust of those who once admired her. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel some satisfaction at first. But over time, those feelings faded, replaced by a kind of quiet indifference. She was no longer a part of my life, and I was finally okay with that. One evening, while sorting through photos from a recent trip, my phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Thought you might like this. A reminder of how far you've come." Attached was a photo from the gala, the moment I stepped onto the stage to confront Henry. My face was calm, composed, while Henry's was a mask of confusion and dread. The image struck me. That night felt like a lifetime ago, yet seeing it brought everything rushing back. I replied simply, "Thank you." Later, as I sat in the quiet of my home, I thought about the person I was in that photo. Hurt, betrayed, but determined. And now, I wasn't the same man anymore. I was stronger, freer, and more certain of what I wanted out of life. The road ahead wasn't perfectly clear, but it didn't have to be. I was finally in control, ready to face whatever came next with the same resolve that had carried me through the storm. As time marched on, I began to rediscover parts of myself that I thought had been lost. The freedom to make decisions without second-guessing how they might affect someone else was liberating. My weekends, once filled with obligatory outings and tense silences, were now spent exploring, taking photos, or simply enjoying the quiet moments. My photography business continued to grow. Clients loved the authenticity I brought to my work, capturing raw, emotional moments instead of forced smiles. It felt good to be appreciated for something I was passionate about. I even began mentoring a few young photographers, sharing the techniques and philosophies that helped me turn pain into art. One of them, a college student named Max, asked me one day, "How do you make your work feel so personal? It's like every shot tells a story." I thought for a moment before replying. I guess I stopped looking for perfection. Life's messy, unpredictable. The best photos capture that truth. It wasn't just advice for photography, it had become my way of living. Despite the progress, there were still echoes of the past. Occasionally, I'd run into someone who knew about the scandal. Their reactions varied, some offered pity, others curiosity, but I never lingered on those moments. If they wanted to gossip, that was their business. I had moved on, and I wasn't going to let anyone pull me back. Lila reached out once more, months after our last conversation. This time, it wasn't a plea for forgiveness. Instead, it was an acknowledgement. "I've done a lot of thinking," her message read. "And I know now that there's no excuse for what I did. I hurt you in ways I can't even imagine. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, truly. I hope you find happiness. Elliot. You deserve it." For the first time, her words felt genuine. I didn't respond right away. When I finally did, my reply was brief. "I appreciate that, Lila. I wish you well." Letting go of the anger didn't mean forgetting, but it did mean freeing myself from the weight of it. Around this time, Eleanor invited me to another gathering, this one more intimate, just a small dinner with a few people she trusted. At first, I hesitated. Socializing still felt foreign, like I was relearning how to connect with people. But something told me to go. The evening was casual, filled with laughter and shared stories. Eleanor had a knack for creating an atmosphere where everyone felt at ease. We talked about everything: life, work, even Henry. When his name came up, it was almost as if we were talking about a bad dream that no longer had power over us. As the night wound down, Eleanor pulled me aside. "You've come a long way, Elliot," she said, her tone warm but firm. "Don't lose sight of that." Driving home, her words stuck with me. It wasn't just about how far I'd come, it was about where I was headed. For the first time in a long while, I felt excited about the future, whatever it held. Life hadn't just returned to normal. It had transformed into something new. Something better. The first anniversary of the gala approached, and I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. What once felt like the worst year of my life had turned into a rebirth. The scars were still there, but they no longer defined me. The photography business was thriving. I'd landed a gallery exhibit showcasing a collection I called Resilience, featuring moments of raw beauty captured through my travels. The opening night was packed, with friends, clients, and even Eleanor in attendance. She approached me near the end of the evening, her eyes scanning the photos on the walls. "You've captured something special, Elliot. Strength. Vulnerability. It's all here." I smiled. "It's been a journey. I owe some of that strength to you." Eleanor laughed lightly. "You owe it to yourself. You're the one who stood up when everything felt like it was falling apart." Her words stayed with me as I walked through the gallery later that night, the space now empty except for me and the photos. Each image represented a part of the journey. Mountains I'd climbed, quiet moments of reflection, and faces of strangers who reminded me of humanity's resilience. Lila had faded into the background of my life. The occasional email or message stopped entirely, and I found I didn't miss them. Forgiveness didn't mean inviting her back into my world. It meant letting go of the power her actions once held over me. As for Henry, he was little more than a cautionary tale now, a man who had everything but lost it all to his own arrogance. The updates about his crumbling life stopped making their way to me. I didn't need to know. His story had no place in mine anymore. Eleanor and I stayed in touch. Our friendship grew slowly, built on mutual respect and an understanding of what it meant to endure betrayal. We had dinner occasionally, sometimes just the two of us, other times with others who'd been through similar trials. She was sharp, warm, and refreshingly honest. One evening, over coffee, she asked, "What's next for you, Elliot? What do you want now that the dust has settled?" The question caught me off guard. For so long, I'd been focused on rebuilding that I hadn't thought much about what came after. I sipped my coffee and smiled. "Honestly, I just want to keep moving forward. Keep creating, keep living. Wherever that takes me." She nodded, her eyes soft. "That sounds like a plan." And it was. I wasn't chasing closure anymore. I'd already found it in the quiet moments of growth and healing. I wasn't looking for revenge or answers from people who had hurt me. Their chapter in my life was over. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in the driver's seat, steering my life in a direction that felt right. It wasn't about starting over, it was about continuing the journey, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever lay ahead. I had been broken, but I was whole again. And this time, I was unshakable.